I've been asking you to suggest your favourite games played by David Bronstein, and this game is the most requested. Played in the Interzonal tournament in 1973 against Ljubomir Ljubojevic. Ljubojevic was actually leading the tournament when this game was played. It is an extraordinary game. It's wild, it's romantic, it shows Bronstein at his most adventurous, completely unafraid. It was much analysed at the time and subsequently as well. Looking at, of course, without computers, looking at it these days with a computer, then there's some interesting things that turn up. Anyway, let's crack on with this one. Interesting that Ljubojevic, even though he was leading the tournament, plays, well, a relatively risky opening. Alekin's defense, he doesn't play e4, e5 or even a Sicilian or, Caro or something. But, the Alekins invites your opponent on. And Bronstein was ready to accept the challenge, playing the 4 pawns variation. Well, I remember as a kid, I used to play this with white. But I got whacked a couple of times and I realised, you take on a lot of responsibility when you throw all these pawns forward. You don't move your pieces. And, well, I've always, since those early days, I've always played knight f3, which is just sensible and sound and, to my mind, guarantees white an advantage. But if you want to try and blow your opponent off the board, then this is the way to do it. It is really uncompromising. You seize all this space in the centre, but you do allow your opponent to hit out at those pawns. Well, recently we saw, for example, Magnus Carlsen has played this a couple of times. Caruana against Carlsen went g6, and Magnus won a great game by hitting out at white centre. And Magnus played it against Nakamura as well. That game, Nakamura-Carlsen went bishop f5. Now that's more like the main line. Bishop e7 is perhaps the most normal move, but Carlsen played bishop b4 and played c5, attacking white's centre. And this is just the kind of position I hate to play as white, when you're kind of overextended and you have to play so precisely to hold everything together. Nakamura did not hold everything together. You can find that video elsewhere on this channel. Anyway, Ljubojevic played in this position a move which is so crazy. c5. This was analysed and played quite a bit in the Soviet Union in the 1920s. Ljubojevic had some experience this with the white side and obviously thought, well, okay, let's wheel this out. It is fantastically risky, inviting the d-pawn on. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, d5. And now c4, that's the crucial move, allowing that bishop into the game. So you can see that, yes, these pawns on d4 and d5 control so many squares, but if that bishop can come out, you can see all this space behind the pawns. And don't forget, open diagonal here, white takes on a lot in shoving those pawns forward. This is already a very, very interesting moment, and I'm going to return to this exact position right at the end of the game. Let me just show you a couple of basic tactics that illustrate the kind of problems we're dealing with here. Bishop takes pawn. Looks like it could be a good move. Knight takes, queen a4 check, and basically you've won a pawn. But no. Bishop takes pawn, loses straight away to queen h4 check, winning that piece. So you can see that these open diagonals mean there are tactics all over the place. I mean, those are just a couple of simple tactics. But I will return to this position at the end because something very important can happen there. Anyway, knight f3 is, of course, a very normal move. Bishop g4. So black brings the bishop out so that knight defends the e-pawn. You never know, that could be interesting. And if, say, bishop e2, then bishop c5 prevents white from castling. It's tricky. So Bronstein played queen d4. Really aggressive. So attacking the bishop, breaking that pin. So bishop takes knight is more or less forced. And now bishop b4. So that bishop enters the game. And now you can see that that d-pawn is under attack. And yeah, well, if it moves forward, it's not going to help white because that knight is going to come out attacking the queen. Suddenly the e-pawn will be under fire. You can notice that white's king is still in the middle. White isn't very well developed. So, first of all, bishop takes pawn. Takes the pawn, but perhaps most importantly, defends that d-pawn. Black castles. Already really tricky. So what's white doing about the king? How is white holding those pawns in the middle? There's a really interesting move here that white has. That's bishop h6. Incredible move. And it is extremely dangerous. If pawn takes, then e6 opens this up. Don't forget there's a rook g1 check happening. But, well, black can do better by developing. But bishop h6 is not to be underestimated. In any case, rook g1 played by Bronstein, also very, very dangerous. The move that black wants to play is knight c6. Notice black is using that pin. But queen g4 wins straight away, attacking g7. And then the knight can be taken. Now, I mentioned that Ljubojevic actually had experience with this whole line. And he'd played this 3 years before as white. And his opponent had played queen c7. Let me just show you this game very quickly. Attacking the bishop. e6, threatening mate. f6 defends. Bishop h6, more pressure here. Queen takes bishop. And now white wins with a really neat finish. Rook g8 check. If rook takes rook, queen takes pawn and mate next move. And in the game, king takes rook, and now beautiful cutback. Queen g1 and soon queen g7 mate. So Ljubojevic must have thought after that game, well, started analysing the position and realised, okay, this is actually quite tricky if black defends correctly. So he was ready with his improvement. g6. So Ljubojevic, well, apparently he was moving very quickly. He was still in his preparation. Bronstein was taking up a lot of time. He was improvising. He was finding all these moves at the board. Now, that bishop is under fire. You might think bishop b3 looks logical. Tuck that bishop out of the way. But no. Knight c6, exploiting the pin. Queen e4 and knight takes e5, exploiting another pin if queen takes. Rook e8. And you can see after this move, basically white's position is collapsing. So those are the kind of tricks that white has to be aware of. So g6 just played. Bishop g5 from Bronstein. Now, this would have involved a lot of calculation. Because after queen c7, you can see not only is that bishop is attacked, but black also threatens to play bishop c5, skewering queen and rook. So Bronstein would have had to have been aware of this. And he just dropped the bishop back. And now black can take the rook. If black doesn't take the rook, then white just has a huge attack. Beautiful centre. So bishop c5. Queen f4. Bishop takes rook. So, well, before I show you bishop takes rook and what happened in the game, I should say that, you know, after the game, this position was hotly debated, and it was thought that knight d7 was actually the best defense. And players like Timon and Spielman and others spent a long time, and Keres, analysing this move. But in fact, my computer recommends this move. Very simple. Rook g3. Now the point of this is that after knight takes e5, well, first of all, the rook is moved away from the bishop, but that rook also defends the pawn, and now white simply castles queenside. Now white is a pawn down, but has a huge initiative just by advancing that pawn. f5. White has a fantastic attack. I mean, if that knight can't really move because there's pressure here, and yeah, white is building up really nicely. So yes, it's interesting that the computer kind of sees through this one very quickly if knight d7. Anyway, bishop takes rook was played. And here, well, this is quite extraordinary because Bronstein played d6. It's not a bad move. A few months later, Ljubojevic repeated this whole line against Georgiou. But Georgiou played queen e2 here. King e2, which is actually just a mistake. After this, basically, this is already good for black. So probably Georgiou just got very confused. Anyway, it's interesting that Ljubojevic was prepared to repeat this. In any case, d6 played by Bronstein. And that's correct. Here, Ljubojevic made a mistake. He played queen c8. He should have come forward, queen c5. I sort of understand why he didn't do this, because it does invite the knight into e4, gaining a tempo against the queen. And it is very tricky. But it seems as though black is, well, hanging on here. Let's put it like that. And again, Ljubojevic repeated this. This was a game between Grunfeld and Ljubojevic, played 6 years later, Riga 1979, and Ljubojevic actually went on to win this game. It's incredible. So even though Ljubojevic went on to lose this particular game, he actually repeated this whole variation and won twice afterwards. The game went like this. Now that is a fantastic move. That must have been part of Ljubojevic's preparation. And basically, well, black is able to defend this position. It's crazy. That's takes the game in another direction. Anyway, d6 has just been played. Queen c5 is the best move. But queen c8 was a mistake. And here, Bronstein also makes a mistake. Most commentators afterwards considered that castles was a stronger move here, with simply a really powerful initiative. Bronstein said afterwards the reason he played king e2 was that, and rejected castles queenside, was that he wanted to leave open the possibility of knight e4. If he'd castled queenside, then of course the knight would have been pinned. That was his idea. And here it looks very strange, but once again queen c5 is the move. And it seems as though black is doing very well after that. And a key variation is knight e4, queen b5 check, king d2, knight c4. And here, well, Timon thought that king e1 could keep white in the game, but knight takes b2 is actually winning for black with a threat. It's tricky. Anyway, after king e2, Ljubojevic brought the bishop back to c5. Now knight e4, as Bronstein wished. And here Ljubojevic brought the knight back from b6. He brought the knight on b8 to d7, which looks kind of natural. You have to bring your pieces out. Incredibly, this looks like a better move. And it's still ludicrously complicated. But knight d7 is actually losing. And Bronstein plays this beautifully. What's interesting is that he uses this pin really nicely. Queen c6. Rook takes c5. Deflecting the knight. Knight f6 check. King h8. Queen h4. Well, that is pretty straightforward now once this sack is made. So mate is threatened. And of course, if h5, well, we're going to see that that's can be taken. Queen b5 check. Ljubo still had a huge time advantage over Bronstein. Bronstein at this moment was down to about a minute to move. So, roughly 15 minutes left. But, that's serious time pressure. So Ljubojevic has given a check. Now, here's your choice. You can see that the king has 5 possible squares it can move to. Which one would you play? There we go. I'm going to put you on the spot. Only one move wins for white. Which one is it? Your move. Well, Bronstein found the correct move, king e3. And it's very interesting. Bronstein writes about this game in his book, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. He said, I'm quoting directly, after the game was finished, Ljubojevic told me, you were lucky to find king e3. But I answered without hesitation, no, it is you who were lucky that in this position only this move wins. The white attack is so strong that normally there should be more than one possibility to win. You played too riskily for a serious tournament game. And then he goes on to say, I never talk like this during friendly analysis after a game. But Ljubojevic should have known that attacking with sacrifices, of which nobody can calculate exactly all the consequences, is my hobby horse. And this is how I made my name. Wow! You can feel the pride that Bronstein has in his play in those words. It's strong stuff. I'm sure Ljubo took it very well. But I thought that was a really interesting passage. Anyway, king e3, it is indeed the only move to win. Mate is threatened. h5. Oh, let me explain why. The point is that after queen d3 check, the king nudges back to f2. The queen covers the d3 square, so knight d3 is impossible, and basically there are no sensible checks in this position. So that's why king e3 had to be played. Back to the game. It's complicated. h5. So white has to break through. And here, Ljubojevic just gave up his queen. Afterwards, he said, so he played now queen takes bishop. After the game, he said, queen d3 check, king f2. And in this position, he'd only analysed queen h5 and then king g8, and black is all right here. But he'd simply forgotten that in this position, bishop f6 actually forces mate. And the point is that in this position, queen g6 could be met by queen takes queen. That's pinned, and that's checkmate. So, knight h5. Queen takes b3 check. Pawn takes. Well, white is now winning. That's clear. But Ljubojevic played on because Bronstein was so short of time. And I like this, that Bronstein now, instead of moving backwards, he moved forwards. He went forwards. There we go. Well, basically black is running out of pieces here. It is completely winning on material, on position. I mean, I'm surprised at the way Bronstein plays now. You know, if you've just played d6 here and then d7 rather, and advance these, then basically black can't touch white's position. But after this, well, the king is a little bit exposed, but of course it's still utterly winning. Rook a6 check. The king came back. Well, yeah, there's really nothing to be done here. I assume the time control was at move 40. I'm guessing the time control was 40 moves in 2.5 hours. So they're just going through the motions now. Queen takes b7 was move 40. And that was move 41. And so the players could kind of relax, and Ljubojevic naturally resign this position. Bronstein writes that after the game, the American chess Mecenas Isidor Turova gave him 2 magnum bottles of champagne, of finest champagne, the finest champagne. And he said it took us only 2 hours to finish them. Fantastic. Well, yeah, certainly some champagne moments in that game. Just superb. Rightly, after the game, this move, bishop g5, was praised by many commentators because after queen c7 is the obvious riposte, and white has to give up material with very unclear consequences. I want to take you back to move 10, because here is where Bronstein played knight f3. I know I'm going into enormous detail here, but in fact this whole variation is just, well, it's gone from black's viewpoint. d6, which was actually a suggestion of Keres. This is, we can say pretty much that this is winning. I mean, obviously, it's a very direct attempt simply to shut in that bishop. Knight c6, and now knight b5. This was played in a game between 2 English players, Philip Morris, who's an English international master, and Tom Hinks Edwards. So knight b5 with a big threat. So black has to play queen h4. And now white gives up the rook in the corner. Bishop g5. I should mention that Bronstein actually gives this in his book and praises the winner. Bishop f5. And now castles queenside with the threat of d7 and then knight c7 mate. And now this is a forced win for white. Bishop g2, and you can see if queen takes pawn, then we win the queen. And so this is how the game went. Queen takes. And now a nice winning move from white here. Black resigned. The bishop is threatened, as well as bishop takes knight, followed by, well, the queen gets in. So basically, d6 just puts an end to this variation from black's viewpoint, and the computer backs this up. But what I thought was really interesting was that Bronstein gave this in his annotations, obviously annotating this game years later, because this game was played in 1995, and praised the player of the white pieces, Philip Morris, as well. So I thought that was a really nice touch, actually. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Very detailed, but just a wonderful game. Thanks for watching.